Here we are in my lovely shop finishing up on part 3 of that T5 World Class build-up with those Gforce racing gears. Now this is part 3, and so I did do parts 1 and 2. So if you haven't watched them, I strongly suggest that you at least touch upon those videos. Links to those videos are in the comment section below. They're pinned to the comment section, so they should be right on top for you. I really want to also thank everybody who's been watching this series so far. And it would mean a lot to me if you took the time to subscribe to my channel and also hit the notification bell. This way you'll get an email when I upload new videos. It'll come to your inbox and you'll say, hey, look, Paul's got a new video up. Great. I've got something to do tonight. I hope this video series is a lot more detailed than most of them, so it should allow you to really build a good 5-speed on your own. So now what I'm going to do is pick up where I left off in part 2 and get into those tail housings of those transmissions. Let's do that. I also wanted to show you, this is a stock Ford extension housing that has this little fin on it for a dampener weight, and the mount pad is at a slight angle. When the transmission's in the car, it's actually at a slight angle. What I do for my Jaguar applications is I mill off this section over here, and I mill down the pad so it's straight, and I use this very small little mount to actually fit in there so it fits in the cross member of the Jaguar. So the extension housings, you can see I clean it up completely. Jaguars really don't have that much power, so this isn't going to rip. I've never had one come apart or crack or anything like that. But that's what I do on the Jaguar system. I kind of just mill off that whole piece there and have this mount totally flat now so it fits in perfectly, because this mount, we lop off the ears and straighten it out and get rid of all the stuff over here that gets in the way of the frame. So this is what I want to show you about that bushing. I can drop this yoke in this bushing and you'll see that there's no movement. Very little movement back and forth. It's got about 5 thousandths clearance on the whole thing, but it still slides in nice and easy. This is a ream bushing. It comes with this extension housing. This isn't a service bushing that was replaced afterwards. I use these simple bearing drivers and I flip them upside down for driving in seals. They work really easy. This particular bearing retainer has a snout cut off of it because it's being used in a hydraulic application where the hydraulics are part of the bell housing. So what I'll do is I'll put this seal, I'll just drive it in. Make sure it's nice and flush. And then what I'll do is I'll actually grease the seal. Very important. You don't want to have seals fire up dry. So 2 things. I'll put grease in here so it actually holds the spring in place in the seal. So if you're tapping on it or anything like that, the spring isn't going to come out. And also just want to grease the seal a little bit. I'm going to put the peelable shim in and the bearing race, and the bearing retainer is ready to go. Next up is the top cover. First thing you want to do is if you have a 2-piece shift lug like this one, you can see that this piece is pressed into the base. These can have a tendency to get loose, and I really don't recommend using them, especially for high performance applications. Some of them transmissions have been used for years with them with no issues, but I've seen them get loose. So the newer design has a 1-piece system, the 1-piece forging. I recommend using that when you can. I do have these on my website. The other is the shift lugs themselves. You want to check to see that they're stretched. This lug you could see is stretched. It has a little bit of a bend to it over here. So if I put this in here, you can see that it has a huge gap compared to, let's say, some of the new lugs where you could see it hardly has a gap at all. So what I do is I change the lugs to new lugs on this and put a 1-piece shift lug on there. So I'm going to have better shifting. Also, if you use stretched out lugs like this one, it'll have a tendency to overshift and actually have the keys of the synchronizers come too far because it allows this to move. This is the only thing keeping the shift fork in alignment properly. So if this stretches out, the shift fork will come out of alignment and overshift the transmission. Another thing you could do is pre-fit your shift forks. Make sure that the forks fit onto the rails properly like this, so that there's no issues at all. I'm putting new forks in this system because the old racing bronze forks were really designed for the lug set and they were too sloppy. So I'm going to put the lug in the 1-2 shift fork. Just goes in like that. And I'll put the interlock piece in. A lot of times these pieces are worn, so you want to check, and you want to have the way this recess here, you want to have it facing in this position, like this. Okay? And you want to put the shift finger inside of it with the dowel hole facing towards the rear. So you're going to have this built like this. Now what you can do is you can start the rail in the cover first, if you want. Leave this out. Catch this like this. And then drop this whole piece in. And catch it on the rail. So now that I've got this in place, I want to have this set up right about at the end over here, because now I'm going to catch the 3/4 fork in. I can actually extend it a little bit, okay? So what I'll do is I'll extend this rail to about here. Catch that in there. And bring it all the way through. Now, before I put this in the cover completely, there's a flat over here. And that flat on some of the rails is for the neutral safety switch, which is on this side. So that flat has to go like this normally. So once I've got everything situated, all the lugs caught in place and everything's good, I'll just make sure that they have the dowel hole lined up. And then I'll put a new dowel pin and drive that pin through here. So you want to make sure that this pin, by the way, is recessed slightly below the shift finger so it doesn't foul against the interlock and prevent the rail from going forward. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just hit this in here. Make sure it's below it. And once it is, then I can test the action. See? That's what I want. Now the next thing we got to do is put the 4 nylon pads on the shift fork. Now a lot of people ask me about using bronze pads. I don't use bronze pads. I don't like them. These nylon pads work fine. I've never had nylon pads burn up. So putting on the pads is just a matter of snapping them in place. Although sometimes you can get shift forks that have little burrs on them. And so you might have to dress them up with a file. I've also put this O-ring on here. If you need to, you could change this O-ring. It's in rebuild kits. Very easy to put on. So I use an anaerobic gasket maker. I always use the anaerobic 49477 from Dynatex. Don't judge the way I did this, okay? It works. You want to put some assembly lube on the pads of the fork. For the same reason, you don't want them to burn up on the initial fire up. What I do is I make sure everything is in neutral position. And then what I do is I'll just simply take this, bring it like this, and down right onto it like that. And put your 2 dowel bolts in first. Catch those. Dowel bolts are important because they align the cover to the case. And also when this cover squeezes down, what's nice about it is you're going to have some of that sealant. If you use RTV, you have to be very careful because the RTV sealant can actually hydraulically lock the case and blow out the bottom of the case. So if you're working with an old case, make sure that all the passages that the bolts go in are clear of any type of sealant or any type of contaminants. There's some other videos of me on YouTube. There's one with Eric the car guy doing a T5 build. You may want to check that video out as well. I torque these cover bolts down usually at around 75 to 80 inch-pounds. Seems to work the best. So I'll just run a quick check, make sure everything is right. That's good. Okay, so I'm going to install the rear extension housing seal, and I'm going to grease the seal like I did the front seal. And I also put a skin coat of anaerobic gel around the outside of the seal to actually prevent sometimes oil from coming out around the seal in case there's an imperfection in the casting. So what I'll do is I'll put the seal in, and I'll kind of get it started with this. And then drive it home. Wipe it clean. Just a few pointers. I always apply the sealant to the extension housing and not to the main case. I put some assembly lube on the O-ring and a little dab of assembly lube on the fifth reverse rail. So it has some lube when it slides in and out of the extension housing. The offset lever, you want to make sure that the old dowel pin is removed completely. So give yourself a visual before you put that in there. Make sure that there's no remaining dowel pin in there. And then what you want to do is just simply take your spring and hold it in there with some grease, okay? And what we're going to do is, it's a process where you're going to have to hold this in place while you slide the extension housing on. And this ball is going to be in the extension housing in the pattern plate, held in with grease as well. So I grease this area in the pattern plate, and I drop the ball in right in the middle there. That'll keep it in place. That's the neutral position. So what I do is I have that ball, spring is in the offset lever, put that in there. I make sure that the dowel hole for the rail is facing upwards so I can get a clean shot into it. And I carefully slide this in. And as I get to this point, I'm actually engaging the offset lever in the rail. So everything is connected now. These bolts, they get torqued down to 30 foot-pounds. 25, 30 foot-pounds works fine. These two upper bolts, I don't put in first. I let the sealant squeeze out into the hole because they go through the case. So if you put the other bolts in first and tighten them down a bit, what's going to happen is it's going to allow the sealant to kind of leak into those passageways. And that'll allow you to seal those bolts because, again, they travel right through into the main case and you could have an oil leak. This guy has some weird vent that he had in there. I'm going to leave that alone. Normally there's just a rubber vent there. Got to set this up for 30 foot-pounds. So normally I wouldn't be doing it this way, but I'm trying to give you a visual on what I'm doing here. So I normally would have this pictured a little bit better. It's the rear bearing race that actually keeps this tail concentric. So when I machine the extension housings for these bigger gears, the bearing race bore is just enlarged, but it's not changed. So what you want to do is you want to pull this back into position so that you can catch the dowel pin hole in the rail. And what I do is I kind of go like this and make sure that it's got nice motion. And again, this is also a good way of just checking that you don't have another pin in here. It's also a good opportunity that while you're at it, put a new shifter bushing in place as well. The front bearing retainer, believe it or not, has a certain position that has to go in. There's a larger drain back slot that faces towards the bottom, and the smaller drain back slot faces towards the top. And I actually want the sealant to squash out a little bit into the holes, so it acts as a thread locker as well and seals them up. I torque these bolts down to 25 foot-pounds. Now if you notice, this doesn't have a snout on it, again because they're using a hydraulic release bearing that's mounted internally into the bell housing for this race car. Now, the way this retainer is structured, none of the sealant can actually squeeze out inside of the transmission. So it may look messy, but it really can't go anywhere internally. It can only go outwards. So that's kind of cool. And we're going to torque this down to 25 foot-pounds. This looks pretty messy, huh? Come on, don't judge, guys. Don't judge. At least I'm wiping it off, right? A lot of times, a lot of people just leave it messy like this and install it in the car. Always remember to wipe and stay off the pipe. A few things. First of all, I've got 3 holes here. This is for the speedometer, and I'm going to just put one of these cap plugs in here right now to keep dirt from it. The other is that this is a reverse brake case. It's a new case, but it was for reverse brake application that I'm not using. So what I usually do is that you have to plug this hole, obviously. So I use an 8mm bolt and I cut it down till about a 1/2 inch long. Put some sealant on it and just put it in here. Now also, because it was a race car, see, what this guy is doing is he had a race car that he's now converting it back to a very cool restored street car. It's a XK120 from the 50s. I don't know what year it is. So I've got this bolt here that is basically sealing up the threaded area for the reverse brake anchor pin, okay? And also, because this vehicle is being put on the street again, we're going to need a reverse light switch instead of a plug. So I'm putting a new reverse light switch in this. Now again, this is in an XK120. So in case you're doing T5 conversions, I also have these adapter plugs in stock. This will go on like that. And a guy can wire it into his system. Let me see what I got here. It's perfect. I just wanted to point out something. The T5 world-class transmission, from what I recall, there were about 251 different assembly part numbers for the T5 World Class platform. It came in a wide variety of vehicles. And for example, I just grabbed this extension housing. This is from a Korean vehicle actually called the Sasang Moyo. It's a 4-wheel drive. There were 2 different versions of this, a short one and a long one, but they were actually 4-wheel drive units for the Korean market. And because this bolt pattern is the same on all T5s, in other words, the back of the main case, it accepts a variety of different types of tail housing. So people, for example, use S10 extensions with the shifter box forward, providing you use the correct main shaft, okay? And you have a typical Camaro extension like this one here. The shifter sits back about 21.5 inches. And for example, this is the typical Mustang unit where the shifter box fits about 19.5 inches. There's a bunch more extensions I have. And also, let me just grab these, for example, just to show you the different types of splines and pilots that are also available. And these are handfuls. I have about 16 different ones here. And there's different splines. This is a 10 spline, this is a 23 spline, this is a 25 spline. It's crazy. But if you get the tooth counts that match, you can actually plug and play these into different types of gearboxes. So in other words, if these two, for example, have the same tooth count of the gear. These are both a 19 tooth headset on these, okay? But with different splines, so, and a little bit longer, you see? So if you need to adapt something into one or the other, it's possible to do that if you know exactly the model numbers and you know where everything goes, okay? So it's a lot of fun being able to use these T5s in different applications and play around with them, provided you have a lot of parts like I do. And trust me, I do again have a lot of parts. But also, I don't think sometimes it's worth it. A lot of people call me up and they want to put 2 or 3 units together to make one. And by the time you get done, you can just go out and buy like a TKO 500 or TKO 600 transmission. That's my take on it anyway. Thanks for watching this video. Please subscribe to my channel. See you around.